There are some new features in Director that have been added over the last year, and I'm going to go over a couple of the newer ones a little briefly, but then some of the big major ones. The one big major one. The first thing you have here is the ability to edit the show inputs, outputs, names right here. So you could actually label your inputs now. So if I wanted this to be a button, and this one is a switch, and this one is a motion sensor, like that, you can just do that. You can also, this is also where you can invert their behavior. Here, you'll see when you do that, you see that the on-off state changes up here, like that, and there's some flavor help text that tells you about all that up here. But that's pretty cool, right? So that's nice. And of course, the exact same thing with the outputs. You can change the name of the outputs here. Like this might be a maglock, this might be an LED, and this could be a I don't know. What do we have? This a latch. Let's a solenoid. There we go. Do a solenoid. Okay. And again, same thing here. This is inverting the text here. This inverts your text. But this is the on by default. This is your normally closed right here. It's very rare you'll have to worry about hide in grid because you see this will delete alt animation. It hides it. It's just if you don't use it, basically. So yeah, so that's that, and there's also the ability to add slave outputs with another flex controller or something like that, but that's not something we're going to talk about today. So there we go, and of course that changes. It's this renaming them up here is the same as renaming them here in this area, like this. So you can either right click and rename as usual, or you can do it all from up here, which is pretty handy. We'll go over edit show variables here in a little bit. That's something different. Let's see, there's also something else you can do now too with manage scenes. You can actually, because normally you could just do your scene name, right? So like, let's say this is your waiting scene, like this. But also, and then let's say this is, something occurs right here. But what's nice is now you can also rename this. These are now called groups. So let's say you needed something to happen here. Let's say this is all this. Let's say this group is one room. So this would be room 1. So that would be very easy for you to kind of do that. And anything you add below that is all under room 1, like that. So that's also been added, which is really nice. So that's a lot of the main changes, the things that you pretty much need to know about. A lot of the new stuff, but the best new stuff is going to be over. I don't know why I'm doing that. The best new stuff is going to be over here. This scene behaviors. This lets you basically unlock a whole new level. This is the boss level of the Director program. This lets you add a bunch of new functionality, and to a degree, it's going to replace these, which is why they're called legacy behaviors. If you can get in the habit of using behaviors as opposed to these, now these are easier to use, and you should always use these as long as they're here. But you should get in the habit of using these. So here's a random new feature: click to hide. You can just collapse all of these things that you don't use, right? So now if you don't use these, they're just not in your way, clogging up your scene, which is cool, right? And as you can see here, there are behaviors that are global. They affect everything regardless of what scene is playing. And these are great for if you want to do a reset scene or reset input, right? So then these are scene specific, all right? And same thing here, you can collapse and hide things like that. But we're gonna focus on the behaviors. So the first thing I wanna show you here, let's add a reset behavior, right? So you're going to click the plus button. You're going to get this pop-up window here, and this is where you have your different options. And as of right now, as of this video, you have input state, which will be your inputs that we labeled earlier here, and this makes life a lot easier so you can see what they are. That's input 1, blah, blah, blah. This is the single shot, and if you're familiar with single shot from originally, but also if you're not, you have a little side help bar that tells you what everything does over here, like this, which is cool. So you can have it where and single shot, real quick for those of you who don't know, is if you push a button and hold it, it won't keep triggering. You have to release the button and repress it to get it to do something. If you go to on, it can, and now it says can repeat. That is, you hold it down, it means it just keeps repeating, and firing. And of course, off, if the input goes off, then it does something right here, as you can see. And so we're just going to do single shot, and under here is timing, and timing is if you hit it, it occurs as soon as you hit the button, right? But there are some additional ways. Eventually, I think you'll have an input for this, but this is what there is now. This is kind of like a debounce almost, but it also kind of allows some other functionality. So let's say you wanted to have your room reset. Let's say you have a button outside of your room that starts your room, right? But to reset, when you hit it just normally, right? So let's say this, we'll just do this. So let's say that this button here is your game start, right? So this right here would then go to scene. You can see here you can choose specific next group, scene and group, random scene and group, which, by the way, can we talk about random scene and group here? I've been wanting this forever. I have all sorts of crazy ideas where, like, shooting gallery games and stuff like that, where it's random. So let's say you had 7 scenes in a group, and whenever you would, it'll just pick a random scene in that group to start from, right? So let's just appreciate the fact that you can now do random scenes. This is awesome. Anyway, so the specified scene. We'll say here, boom, something occurs. So that would be your basic behavior, right? You hit a button, and here it tells you, and if you mouse over, it'll tell you what that input is. Where you can see there, the little flavor text, the tooltip pops up and tells you what's going on. So you'll see here, and it says if button turns on, then play scene room 1 blarg, right? Okay, but let's say we wanted a reset button. Now we do the same thing, but now I set it for, let's say, 2 seconds. And now what I would do is I would have it go to a reset scene, right? I would come here, and then let's say group 8 is my reset scene. Matter of fact, we'll make that my reset scene right there. Reset, like that. So now, if button turns on for 2 seconds, then play scene group 8, scene 0, like that. And that's it. It's that easy to do something that basic, right? So that's the global setting. That is regardless of what's happening, right? So now let's go over to scene-specific settings. Nothing changes. Pretty much everything is the same. I'm just going to go over here to scene-specific settings. So let's walk through what all these do right here. So we already went over input state right here. And as you can see, as we already went through, input state does this and everything like that. And so when you do an input state, you hit a button. If the button turns on, the thing happens instantly, and it would control an output, which, of course, is turning on or off your output, right? So the maglock, you push the button, maglock turns off like that. Now, as you'll see here, you have until further notice, or momentarily, or for an X amount of time, right? So the maglock let's say the maglock would turn off for 30 seconds. Now, obviously with the maglock, you wouldn't want it to do that, but you get the idea. Let's say this is a solenoid, though. So you don't want your solenoid in an on position forever. So in this case, you would have it turn on, or momentarily, like this, you can see. This will keep the output on for as long as the conditions are true, right here, like that. And also for, let's see, until further notice means it would become on. It would just stay on, right? So like that. So we would say that we'd want this solenoid on for 5 seconds. Not even that, actually, 2 seconds. And then that's it. And now the solenoid would pop and close again to prevent burnout. Now, the interesting thing about the behaviors is you can stack them, right? You can have a bunch of things happen. So let's say you want the input state button 1, and input state button and switch has to happen at the same time, right? So if you'll notice here, it says if both buttons turn on and the switch turns on, then this. Now, one thing you may have noticed here is when I added this popped up right here. Now, this lets you go all or any. So you'll notice here, this is button turns on and switch turns on. But if I do any, this becomes an or statement. So instead of it being if button turns on and switch turns on. Now it is if button turns on or switch turns on, then do this. So now you end up with if-or statements instead of if-and statements. And if you are used to working in any kind of C++ or Arduino programming or anything like that, this might make more sense to you to do if this then this statements here. And but also some people might understand the concept of a show running order better, but quite frankly, you have the power of both at your fingertips, and you learn both, and this unlocks a ton of potential to do some amazing things with this program and these controllers. All right, let's go back in and do something else. So your output state. If your output state, so we have, let's say your maglock turns off. So also right here, this, actually I'm going to cancel this out real quick. So I'd go up here and set show outputs. So I would want this on by default, right? Because that's how maglocks tend to work. You tend to want that. So if I go over here and the output state of the maglock is off, once that goes off, I can tell it to do something else. Like I can tell it to turn on an LED once that turns off. And then, of course, you have until further notice, which means this would just stay on forever. You have momentarily, which means, if you read down here, this will keep the output on for only as long as the conditions are true, or for X amount of time, right here. So let's say the light comes on for 10 seconds. So the LED, once the maglock is off, the output is off, the LED would turn on for 10 seconds, and then it would turn off again. So that's cool, right? All right, let's look at a different one here. We have scene position. I really like this one quite a bit. The scene position, you can do at scene start, at scene end, or equal to, or less than, or greater than. So you can have something happening in a scene, and it happens only for only before, like if it's greater than 30 seconds. You can have it do something. Or if it's less than 30 seconds, it'll do something. If it's equal to, which means as soon as it hits, a certain time in the timeline, it triggers something. Most of the time that I've messed with this, I've had to just have stuff happen at the start of a scene. That's usually when I do it. So, but again, all this is kind of the same. Down here, controls an output, goes to a scene. So like at scene start, control the DMX channel. So we'll look at this. I don't have any DMX things on here, but you can set the value. Like if this was just a fog machine and the value is on or off, essentially, you would set the fog machine to just trigger for 6 seconds. I actually just did this in a show last week. So this is pretty handy for that right there. So I must select the DMX output, which I don't have one, so we're not going to do that. But at the scene start, turn on my solenoid for 2 seconds because you don't want your solenoids on for very long. So there's another one. Now, let's look at variable state. Variable state is interesting, and it's essentially a binary system. It is a 1 or a 0, a true or a false, an on or an off. And you'll see here it refers to this as a Boolean, and a Boolean is basically that. It is an on or an off. It is a binary state, and you'll see it's equal. This is where we get really into a lot of the crazy programming stuff in a show, right? And so again, your follow-up actions are usually the same. Not much down here changes on this stuff like that. You can enable disable inputs, which is pretty self-explanatory. Let's say like the variable state something equals true, and then this would disable input 3, right? So you don't have to worry about this. But let's talk about that in a second. Let's talk a little more about the variables. So. Let's go over here to edit show variables right here. So this is your show variable. So a Boolean here or an integer here. Integer, of course, gives you a range like that, and behaviors are true, false, right? And also make sure you read this. All Boolean variables are set to false on reset. So everything starts at a false state So just remember that. And all of these are set to 0 on reset, right? So I'm going to name this, let's see, Maglock, I guess. And we're going to name this LED, just to go with kind of what we're having here. Now I've set that to true right there, or I've set the names of that. So actually, to explain this a little easier, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a show from something I've worked on previously and walk you through it. I think that would probably be the easier way to explain this than completely doing it from scratch. All right, so we're going to have to set up our scene here for something that we need to do. To do that, I'm going to add a different variable here real quick. We already have, I need a switch. And I'm going to need, let's see, I believe chair. Here we go, like that. And then I'm also going to have, let's see, inputs. I'm going to add chair to this. So here's what occurred, and I'll show you a little kind of a drawing of it down here in the corner. There was an electric chair that a player had to sit in, and there was a switch that had to be thrown. And there was an LED above the switch. Now, for the switch to work, it had to be the switch had to be in the off position, and the LED had to be on, and somebody had to be sitting in the chair, right? So all these things had to occur, and there had to be ways to make sure it couldn't be brute forced. Like, you didn't want somebody to sit in the chair, then stand up, and then throw the switch. You needed all these things to kind of talk to each other. So we're gonna rebuild that here using variables, right? So let's take a look at that. Let's see, input state. So the chair right here, this would be if the chair is on like this, then you're going to have modify a variable, right? Because there's going to be more things here, but we're going to have this set to true because remember, everything starts as false at reset. Also, you can have it reset at the scene start too. You can have it reset back to false here, like that. Also, one other thing I mentioned earlier, I wanted to talk about this, ignore at start. This is good to have if you have two scenes, one after the other, that are both triggered by a single button, and so what'll happen is if you push like, an input 1, and then input 1 also goes to another scene, it'll jump scenes. It'll just skip a scene on you. So if you do this, ignore it start, it won't jump through scenes. It'll wait till it loops back around before it does that. So that's just something I forgot to mention earlier that's good to know. Not applicable in this situation, but I wanted you to know about it. Anyway, all right, so but this isn't all we need. We also need this here. We need the switch here. We're going to call that switch off. There we go. If the switch is off, all right. And then I'm trying to remember all of the logic of this thing because it was a thing. So sets the chair. Actually, this sets the switch to true, and then also this would turn on control output. This would turn on the LED like that. And yeah, so I believe this is our logic here. If the chair turns on and the switch is off, then set the switch variable to true and turn on the LED, right? So there's our first bit of logic. But now you have to kind of do the opposite of this, which, by the way, you can copy behaviors like this. I can copy it, and then I can paste it. So I can duplicate a behavior and then kind of go in and edit it like this, right? So now if I go in and say if the chair is off, like that, and the switch is off, like that, and then turn the knife switch, turn off the LED, so this would then be off, like that, and then this would be set to false, like that. So now you have your two logics going on here that prevent the thing from occurring. All right. So now we're gonna do it one more time, like this. We're going to let's see if the chair is on, and the knife switch is on, like that. And then the knife switch equals true. We actually don't need this one now. The LED doesn't really matter. Then now this goes to, hold on a second, goes to a scene. So we're going to have this go to we're going to have to go to reset just because, like that. And now this here, go to variable state, and you take the switch and have it equal to true right here, like that. And now you can see that if the chair turns on and the switch is on and the switch equals true, then you'll go to the scene that plays your animation or whatever you tell it to do in your then statement here. So as you can see, there's a lot of options and flexibility and crazy things you can do with this. And you could add a lot more quantifiers and things to that with the logic. But if your brain works better on booleans and if-thens, then the behaviors are definitely for you. And as you can see, there is a lot you can do with this if you do a very big deep dive and kind of start getting into the minutia and layers of it all. So hopefully this helps you understand the variables. Real quick, I just want to clarify the difference between integers and variables here. So right here, this is very similar to what we talked about before, the modifying of a variable. And I mentioned before how booleans are binary, 1 and 0. But integers are a value, and again, anytime you have questions about this, most of them can be answered here in this little sidebar, like that, right? So if I go down here, I can set the chair in. I can have it set to, let's say 50, right? But what you can do is you can have it increase or decrease by 50. So you can start something at a value and then have that value jump up to something else. This basically lets you able to do things in increments instead of just a 1 and a 0. This lets you, it's like, oh, when this happens, add 10 to it. And then if this happens, add 10 to it, now it makes 20. And once something reaches a value of 30, then do this. That is what you can do with integers, instead of booleans. One last thing I'll talk about before we wrap up this video is something that recently got added to Director. Always keep your Director up to date. You can also, if you want to take some chances, you can turn on beta releases. You end up getting some new features faster, but they might have a few like bugs in them and stuff. But always report bugs when you find them, so they can fix the stuff right there. But one of the more recent things it was added was the controller error codes. If your controller starts doing something weird, this will help you decipher what's going on. So, and it's usually the blinking here on the lights, the LEDs. This is something that's good to have in case your SD card is corrupt, something got fried, or just the controller is being wonky or some such. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video and find it very useful, and if more cool things are added, we'll do a part 2 down the line. But for right now, this should get you started and doing some cool things here with the behaviors.